My parents forced me to live as their dead son for 15 years, so I escaped and never looked back. A year later, my mom showed up, begging for the daughter she threw away. My parents chose my gender for me, and now I want to switch back. It all started when I was 5 and I noticed them calling me Andrew instead of Amelia. They started dressing me in polo shirts and other boys' clothing, and since I didn't have any siblings, I thought it was normal. In fact, I played along. I let them cut my hair super short and corrected anyone who used she, her pronouns. My parents decorated my bedroom walls with NBA posters and action figures. It was around this time that I learned that getting my parents to love me was infinitely more important than what I wanted. So when I wanted to play with Barbie dolls and have sleepovers with my female friends, I didn't care. I figured eventually those worldly desires could be extracted from my body, and eventually my dream could come true, to be the son my parents always wanted. So even when I started elementary school, I used the boys' bathrooms. I even remember attempting to use the urinal. Naturally, this led to a few questions arising, but I'd always shut them down with authority and tell them, this is just how things are, or at least as much authority as a 7-year-old can humanly possess, LOL. Eventually, I think my teachers actually started believing I was a boy because the questions faltered, and somehow I managed to join the boys' football team. I hit myself in secret whenever I heard any girlish giggle or tone come out of my mouth, because the more masculine I became, the more my parents loved me. I remember being in the peak of my boyhood, when literally anyone I interacted with told me I was the best son a parent could ask for. My parents practically treated me like a king. Every day I'd wake up to a home-cooked breakfast in bed, with homemade strawberry lemonade and a surprise toy that I'd circled in my catalog. It was the best feeling ever. Fast forward to when I turned 15 and got my first period. I genuinely thought I was dying, because no one had ever introduced me to the concept of female puberty before. I frantically ran into my mom's room to tell her what happened, expecting her to call an ambulance or something. Instead, her face turned ghost white, so I lunged at her for a hug. "Get away from me!" she screamed, before curling up into a ball and having a mental breakdown. That's when my dad barged into the room. "Honey, what the F is going on? Andrew just got his period." As soon as she told him, he grabbed my wrist, dragged me into another room, and locked the door. "Amelia, I need to tell you something." It was the first time my dad had ever called me Amelia, so I knew it was serious. "You may have noticed by now that you aren't exactly a boy." I nodded in relief. It was a truth that I had waited to be acknowledged for a very long time. And that's when all the pieces of the puzzle finally came together. Turns out I did have an older sibling, a brother, one that my parents were extremely excited to raise. But there were complications during his birth, and my mom had a miscarriage. My dad tried to convince her to take some time off work and let herself grieve, but she refused. And instead, she kept pushing my dad to put a baby inside her. So when they found out I was a girl, all the grief that my mom had suppressed resurfaced, and the only way my dad combated it was by raising me as Andrew instead of Amelia. That's when my dad broke down in tears. It was one of those extremely painful sobs, and I could tell he was just letting everything out. I froze, the truth hitting me like a punch to the chest. My entire life had been built on the ashes of a brother I never knew existed. Still, I was somewhat relieved that my facade was finally over, because I wanted nothing more than for my parents to love me for who I was, until my dad proceeded to take my silver lining and shut all over it. "Son, I need you to keep being Andrew for a while, just until you move out. Think of it as a favor to your mother." "A favor?" I snapped. "I've been living my entire effing life hating myself for who I was, all because of you." My dad's eyes were instantly filled with sorrow. I knew he was just trying to keep the peace and make everyone happy, but enough was enough. I barged out of the room, and that's when I was faced with my mom. "Andrew, are you okay? How are you feeling?" "I'm not doing this anymore, Mom. This isn't right. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't keep suffering." She looked like she had just been slapped in the face. I immediately left the house and went on a little shopping spree with the money from my babysitting job. For the first time, I bought exactly what I wanted. Dresses, skirts, heels, and I looked damn good too. Unfortunately, my mother disagreed. I tried to be quiet when I got home, but still she heard me. She grabbed the nearest pair of kitchen scissors and started cutting through the dresses. "This is not who you are. I will not allow this." This time I didn't even feel sad or angry, just scared. Luckily, my dad heard the commotion and immediately came rushing in. While he tried to calm her down, I literally dialed 911, not knowing what else to do. I didn't know what else to do. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. The police showed up about 15 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, separated us to take statements. The female officer took me to the living room while the male officer talked to my parents in the kitchen. I told her everything. The whole story about being raised as Andrew, finding out the truth, and my mom destroying my clothes. The officer seemed genuinely concerned and kept taking notes. Her kind eyes made me feel like someone was finally listening. I felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe this was my escape. Maybe someone would finally help me. But then I heard my mom's voice from the kitchen, all calm and collected. She was telling the male officer that I was going through a difficult phase and had been acting out. I couldn't believe it. She was completely twisting the story. When the officers brought us back together, my mom had tears in her eyes. She told them I had been emotionally unstable lately, and she was just trying to prevent self-injury. She claimed cutting up my clothes was her way of stopping me from doing something I'd regret. My dad nodded along, backing up her story, the perfect united front they'd always presented to the world. The male officer looked at me with pity. "It sounds like your family is going through a tough time," he said. "I'd recommend seeking counseling for your daughter. These teenage years can be confusing." My heart sank. They were buying it. My mom's manipulation was stronger than I thought. The officers left after suggesting some family therapists, and I was left alone with my parents again. The next few days were tense. My mom acted like nothing had happened, still calling me Andrew. My dad kept giving me these sad looks but didn't say anything. I felt trapped. I had tried to escape, and it had failed miserably. I started researching online about gender identity and parental abuse. I found some forums where people shared similar stories. One person suggested documenting everything, so I started keeping a journal hidden under my mattress. I wrote down every conversation, every incident, every lie. I also started saving money again. I got more babysitting jobs and hid the cash in different spots around my room. I wasn't sure what my plan was yet, but I knew I needed options. A week after the police incident, my mom announced she had scheduled an appointment with a therapist. I was hopeful for about 5 seconds until she added, "Doctor, Peterson is an old friend of mine. He's going to help you work through these confusing feelings." Great. Another person who would be on their side. I was running out of options, and I was starting to feel desperate. I needed help, but I didn't know where to turn. My parents had created this perfect bubble where everyone believed their version of reality. How was I supposed to break free? The first session with Dr. Peterson was exactly what I expected. My mom sat right next to me the entire time, squeezing my knee whenever I tried to tell the truth. Dr. Peterson kept referring to me as Andrew and talking about phase confusion and identity disorders. I just nodded along, knowing this wasn't real therapy. This was damage control. After we left his office, my mom seemed pleased. "See? Dr. Peterson is going to help you get past this confusion." I didn't respond. I was learning that silence was sometimes my best defense. That night, I added Dr. Peterson to my journal entry. I wrote down every leading question he asked and how my mom manipulated the session. My journal was getting pretty thick with entries. I hid it in a new spot every few days, paranoid my mom would find it during one of her room cleanings, which were really just excuses to snoop through my stuff. The next day at school, I decided to talk to my guidance counselor, Ms. Rivera. She had always seemed pretty cool and understanding. I waited until lunch period and knocked on her office door. "Come in," she called. When I entered, she smiled. "Andrew, what can I help you with today?" I took a deep breath and told her I needed to talk about something serious. I explained that I was actually born female, that my parents had raised me as a boy, and that I wanted to be recognized as Amelia now. I didn't go into all the details, but I gave her enough to understand the situation. Missy Rivera's expression changed from surprise to concern. She asked a few questions, then told me she would need to contact my parents and possibly Child Protective Services. My stomach dropped. I begged her not to call my parents yet, explaining what happened with the police. She reluctantly agreed to hold off for a day while she consulted with the school administration. I left her office feeling a mix of hope and dread. Would someone finally believe me, or would this be another dead end? I got my answer the next morning when my mom stormed into my room before school. "What did you tell that counselor?" she demanded, her face red with anger. Apparently, Ms. Rivera had called despite her promise not to. My mom had already spoken to the principal, claiming I was acting out and creating stories for attention. She even brought up Dr. Peterson as evidence that I was already getting proper help. "You're not going back to that school," my mom declared. "I've already called in to say you're sick. We'll be looking at other options." Just like that, I lost my one potential ally and my daily escape from home. My mom took away my phone too, saying I needed to focus on getting better. I was completely cut off. For the next week, I was basically under house arrest. My mom worked from home to keep an eye on me. My dad still went to his office but called multiple times a day to check in. I was never left alone for more than a few minutes. During this time, my mom went through my room thoroughly. She found most of my hidden cash and confiscated it. Thankfully, she missed the wad of bills I'd taped to the underside of my desk drawer. She didn't find my journal either, which I'd started hiding inside an old stuffed animal with a broken seam. My mom also went through my closet, removing anything she deemed too neutral that could be worn in a feminine way. I was left with the most masculine clothes possible: baggy jeans, sports jerseys, and button-up shirts. The isolation was getting to me. I needed to talk to someone who would understand. I I remembered my friend Charlotte from my biology class. We weren't super close, but she had always been nice to me. More importantly, she had mentioned having a cousin who was transgender. Maybe she would get it. One afternoon, when my mom was on a conference call in her office, I snuck into my dad's study and used his computer. I found Charlotte on Instagram and sent her a direct message explaining my situation as briefly as possible. I asked if we could meet somehow. Then I deleted the message from the sent folder and cleared the browser history. 2 days later, I was surprised when Charlotte showed up at our front door. She told my mom she was dropping off homework assignments. My mom seemed suspicious, but let her in. Charlotte handed me a folder full of papers, then asked if she could use our bathroom. On her way back, she slipped me a note hidden between the homework sheets. After she left, I locked myself in my bathroom to read it. Charlotte believed me. She wrote that her parents were willing to help if I needed a place to stay. She included her phone number and told me to call from a safe phone anytime. I felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. I wasn't completely alone. I just needed to figure out how to get out of this house. My chance came sooner than expected. My dad's mother got sick, and both my parents needed to travel to see her. They debated what to do with me, clearly not trusting me to stay home alone. Finally, they decided I would stay with our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had known me as Andrew for years. Mrs. Chen was nice, but went to bed early and took medication that made her sleep deeply. The first night I was there, I waited until she was asleep, then snuck out. I walked to the gas station down the street and used the payphone to call Charlotte. Her dad picked me up 20 minutes later. He didn't ask many questions, just drove me to their house where Charlotte was waiting. She hugged me immediately, which felt weird but also really nice. I hadn't been hugged in a long time. Charlotte's mom made me hot chocolate while I explained everything in more detail. They were horrified by my story. Charlotte's dad, who turned out to be a social worker, said what my parents were doing was emotional abuse. He said I had options, including filing for emancipation. I stayed at Charlotte's house that night, borrowing some of her clothes to sleep in. It felt strange wearing a nightgown, but also right somehow. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, reality hit. My parents would be checking in with Mrs. Chen. They would discover I was gone. Charlotte's parents sat down with me to discuss next steps. They couldn't legally keep me without my parents' permission, but they weren't going to just send me back either. Charlotte's dad called a colleague who worked with LGBTQ+ youth. She recommended a local organization called Rainbow Bridge that provided resources for teens in crisis. They had connections with lawyers who could help with my situation. Before we could make any decisions, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen, panicking because my parents had called and she couldn't find me. I told her I had gone for an early walk and would be back soon. Charlotte's dad agreed to drive me back so I could get my things and properly explain to Mrs. Chen that I was leaving. When we arrived, there was a police car in the driveway. My heart sank. Mrs. Chen had called the police to report me missing, despite my call. The officer was taking notes as Mrs. Chen spoke rapidly, gesturing with her hands. Charlotte's dad handled it expertly. He introduced himself as a social worker and explained that I had reached out for help due to an abusive home situation. The officer seemed skeptical at first, but Charlotte's dad showed him his professional credentials and explained the situation in detail. He described the emotional abuse I'd experienced and how my parents had been forcing me to live as a gender that wasn't mine. He mentioned the involvement of Rainbow Bridge, a respected organization the officer recognized. After a lengthy discussion that included calling his supervisor and consulting with a youth services liaison, the officer agreed to let me leave with Charlotte's family temporarily while the situation was investigated properly. He took detailed statements from both me and Mrs. Chen, then helped me gather my things. Mrs. Chen looked confused and worried, but the officer assured her she had done nothing wrong. As we were leaving, my phone rang again. It was my mom. I showed the screen to Charlotte's dad, who nodded encouragingly. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. My mom was furious. She demanded to know where I was and why I had left Mrs. Chen's house. I took a deep breath and told her I was safe but wasn't coming home. I was getting help from people who accepted me as Amelia. There was silence on the other end. Then my mom's voice turned ice cold. "You're making a huge mistake. We're coming home immediately. This little rebellion ends now." I hung up, my hands shaking. Charlotte's dad put his arm around my shoulders and led me to the car. "Let's get you somewhere safe," he said. The next few days were a blur of meetings and phone calls. I spoke with a counselor at Rainbow Bridge who specialized in transgender youth. She helped me understand that what my parents had done was a form of conversion therapy, forcing me into a gender identity that wasn't mine. She also connected me with a lawyer who explained my legal options. Meanwhile, my parents had returned home and were on the warpath. They filed a missing person report, claiming Charlotte's family had kidnapped me. They called everyone they knew, spreading a story about how I was mentally unstable and had been manipulated by radical gender activists. The police came to Charlotte's house to investigate the kidnapping claim. Fortunately, the same officer who had helped me at Mrs. Chen's was assigned to the case. He explained to his colleagues that this was a case of a minor seeking safety from an abusive situation, not a kidnapping. Still, I couldn't stay at Charlotte's house forever. My parents knew where they lived, and I was worried they might try something desperate. The counselor at Rainbow Bridge suggested their emergency youth shelter, where I could stay while we figured out a more permanent solution. The shelter wasn't great, just a converted house with bunk beds and shared bathrooms, but it was safe. There were other teens there with similar stories. Some had been kicked out for being gay or transgender. Others had run away from abusive homes. We had group therapy sessions every day and regular meetings with caseworkers. My caseworker, Jen, helped me file for emergency emancipation. She explained it was a long shot. Most judges prefer to keep families together, but given the unique circumstances, we might have a chance. At the very least, it would buy us time to build a stronger case. A week into my stay at the shelter, my parents found me. I was sitting in the common room doing homework when I heard my mom's voice at the front desk. My blood ran cold. I slipped out the back door and texted Jen, who came immediately. By the time I returned with Jen, my parents were arguing with the shelter director. My mom was crying, claiming they just wanted their son back. My dad was threatening legal action against the shelter for harboring a minor. Jen stepped in, explaining that I was under the protection of Rainbow Bridge and had filed for emancipation. She showed them the paperwork. My dad's face turned red with anger, but my mom just looked defeated. "Can we at least talk to our child?" my dad asked, carefully avoiding using either name. Jen looked at me questioningly. I nodded. I needed to face them eventually. We sat in the shelter's meeting room, just the four of us. My mom couldn't look me in the eye. My dad did all the talking, switching between pleading and threatening. He promised things would be different if I came home. They would consider letting me express myself more. They would find a better therapist. I just shook my head. "It's too late," I told them. "You didn't raise me. You raised a replacement for the son you lost. I need to find out who I really am." My mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll always be Andrew to me. I can't lose my son again." Her words hurt, but they also confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about me. It never had been. The meeting ended with no resolution. My parents left, and I returned to my bunk bed feeling drained but somehow stronger. I had faced them and stood my ground. The next day, I received notice that there would be a hearing for my emancipation petition in 2 weeks. Jen helped me prepare, gathering evidence and practicing what I would say to the judge. Charlotte and her parents agreed to testify on my behalf. Even Mrs. Chen, who had been confused but ultimately concerned for my welfare, provided a written statement about my parents' controlling behavior. As the hearing approached, my parents changed tactics. They started sending messages through their lawyer, offering compromises. They would let me see a therapist of my choosing. They would allow me to explore my identity as long as I came home. Each offer came with conditions that would still give them control over my life. I declined every offer. I was done with half measures and conditional acceptance. 2 days before the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor at the shelter. It was my dad, alone. He looked tired and older somehow. Jen stayed with me as he sat down across from us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and a lot of reading about gender identity and what we did to you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I was wrong. We were wrong. I'm so sorry, Amelia." Hearing him say my real name without hesitation made me tear up, but I remained cautious. "What about Mom?" His expression darkened. "Your mother isn't ready to accept this. She may never be, but I want you to know that I'm trying to understand, and I want to make things right, however I can." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately, to have at least one parent back in my life, but another part remembered 15 years of lies and manipulation. "I need time," I told him, "and I need to be Amelia, completely. Not just when it's convenient or when Mom isn't around." He nodded, understanding. "I'm going to get help, real help, for myself, to understand what we did and why it was wrong." He reached across the table like he wanted to take my hand, then stopped himself. "Whatever you decide about the emancipation, I'll support you, and I'll keep working on your mother." After he left, I sat with Jen trying to process what had happened. Was this a genuine change of heart, or just another manipulation tactic? I wanted to believe him, but trust was going to take time to rebuild. The day of the hearing arrived. I wore clothes borrowed from Charlotte, a simple blouse and jeans that felt feminine but not overly so. I wanted to look like myself, whoever that was. Both my parents were there with their lawyer. My mom still couldn't look at me, but my dad gave me a small nod of encouragement. Charlotte's family sat behind me with Jen and the Rainbow Bridge lawyer. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, listened carefully as both sides presented their cases. My parents' lawyer argued that I was too young to make such important decisions and needed parental guidance. Our lawyer presented evidence of the psychological harm I had suffered from being forced to live as someone I wasn't. When it was my turn to speak, I told my story simply and honestly. I explained that I didn't hate my parents, but couldn't continue living a lie. I needed space to discover who I really was after 15 years of being someone else. The judge asked thoughtful questions about my plans for school, housing, and financial support. The Rainbow Bridge representative explained their transitional housing program for youth like me, where I could stay while finishing high school. After hearing all the evidence, the judge called for a short recess to consider her decision. Those 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in the hallway with Charlotte, too nervous to speak. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge delivered her ruling. She granted me partial emancipation. I would be allowed to make my own decisions regarding my gender identity, medical care, and living situation, but my parents would still have certain legal responsibilities until I turned 18. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. I could live at the Rainbow Bridge housing, attend a new school, and begin the process of legally changing my name. My parents would have to continue providing financial support and insurance coverage, but they couldn't force me to live as Andrew anymore. As we left the courtroom, my dad approached me. "I meant what I said, he told me quietly. I want to be part of your life, Amelia. When you're ready. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It would be a long road to forgiveness, but maybe someday. My mom walked past without a word, her face a mask of grief. I understood then that for her, this was like losing her son all over again. I hoped that someday she would realize she hadn't lost anyone. She had gained a daughter who had been there all along. That night, in my new room at the Rainbow Bridge housing, I wrote the longest entry yet in my journal. For the first time, I signed it with my real name, Amelia. It felt right. It felt like coming home to myself. The next few weeks were challenging, but in a different way than before. Instead of fighting to be seen, I was learning who I actually was. What did Amelia like? What clothes made her feel comfortable? What name did she want to be called? These were questions I'd never been allowed to ask before. I enrolled in a new high school where nobody knew me as Andrew. I introduced myself as Amelia from day one. Some kids were curious about my background, but most just accepted me as the new girl. It was refreshing to start over without the weight of my past. Charlotte visited often, helping me shop for clothes and giving me tips on hair and makeup. I wasn't interested in being super feminine, that wasn't me either, but I enjoyed exploring styles without judgment. I cut my hair in a bob that felt right for my face, and I started wearing clothes that expressed who I was, rather than who anyone else wanted me to be. My dad kept his word. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in LGBTQ+ issues and joined a support group for parents of transgender kids. He called once a week, always careful to use my correct name and pronouns. Our conversations were awkward at first, but gradually became more natural. My mom remained distant. She sent money as required by the court, but included notes addressed to Andrew. I returned them unopened. It hurt, but I understood she was still grieving for someone who had never really existed. One day, about 2 months after the hearing, I received a package from my dad. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen before. It contained pictures of me as a baby, before they started calling me Andrew. There I was in pink onesies, with tiny earrings and a headband with a bow. There were photos of my mom holding me, looking tired but happy. Along with the album was a note from my dad. These belong to you all along. I'm sorry we tried to erase this part of your history. I cried as I flipped through the pages. Here was proof that Amelia had existed from the beginning. She hadn't been erased completely. She had just been waiting to be rediscovered. That album became my most treasured possession. It was the bridge between my past and my future, proof that I wasn't starting from scratch but reclaiming something that had always been mine. The album became my anchor during those first few months of independence. Whenever I doubted myself or felt lost, I'd flip through those baby pictures and remember that Amelia had always existed. I wasn't becoming someone new. I was returning to who I was meant to be all along. Living at the Rainbow Bridge housing was actually pretty cool. I shared a small apartment with 2 other teens, Lisa and Harper. Lisa was there because her parents kicked her out when she came out as lesbian. Harper was non-binary and had run away from a super religious household. We all had our own rooms but shared a kitchen and living area. It felt like a weird little family. My case manager Jen checked in weekly to make sure I was doing okay with school, mental health, and just life in general. She helped me navigate the process of legally changing my name, which turned out to be way more complicated than I expected. So many forms and fees and court appearances. But finally, after 3 months of bureaucratic nonsense, I officially became Amelia Grace Wilson. I framed the court order and hung it on my bedroom wall. School was going surprisingly well. I made some new friends who only knew me as Amelia. I joined the art club and discovered I actually had a talent for painting. My grades improved too, probably because I wasn't spending all my mental energy pretending to be someone else. My dad kept calling regularly. Our conversations got less awkward over time. He told me he was reading books about transgender experiences and attending a support group for parents. He seemed genuinely committed to understanding me better. He even asked if he could visit sometime, but I wasn't ready for that yet. Baby steps. My mom was a different story. She still refused to call me Amelia or acknowledge what happened. The court-ordered support payments came on time, but that was our only connection. I tried not to let it bother me, but some nights I'd cry myself to sleep thinking about her. Charlotte told me to give it time, that some parents take longer to come around. I wasn't sure my mom ever would. About 6 months after moving into Rainbow Bridge housing, I got an unexpected visitor. I was doing homework in the common area when the front desk called to say someone was asking for me. I figured it was Charlotte or maybe my dad finally showing up unannounced. Instead, I found Mrs. Chen waiting in the lobby. She looked exactly the same. Tiny frame, silver hair in a neat bun, practical shoes. She smiled nervously when she saw me. Amelia, she said, pronouncing my name carefully. You look well. I was so shocked to hear her use my real name that I just stood there for a second. Mrs. Chen had known me as Andrew for years. She'd been my babysitter since I was little. I finally managed to thank her and invite her to sit down in the visitors area. I bring something, she said, pulling a small paper bag from her purse. Inside was a jade pendant on a silver chain. In Chinese culture, jade protects the wearer, brings good fortune. I held the necklace in my palm, touched by the gesture. Thank you. But why? I know your mother for many years, Mrs. Chen said. She is a stubborn woman, proud woman, but she is hurting. She patted my hand. I tell her, losing son is sad, but having daughter is blessing. My throat tightened. You talked to my mom about me? Mrs. Chen nodded. Many times. She listened, even if she not show it. She stood up, smoothing her pants. Just wanted you to know, and to see you happy. After she left, I sat there holding the jade pendant, trying to process what she'd said. Was my mom actually listening to Mrs. Chen? Was there hope she might come around someday? I didn't want to get my hopes up, but I couldn't help feeling a tiny spark of optimism. I put on the necklace and tucked it under my shirt, close to my heart. A few weeks later, I got a text from my dad asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, suggesting a cafe near my school. I arrived early and grabbed a table in the corner, nervously fidgeting with my cup. When my dad walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight and grown a beard. He looked older but somehow lighter too. He ordered a coffee and sat across from me. For a minute, we just looked at each other awkwardly. Then he pulled out a small gift bag and slid it across the table. Happy birthday, he said. I know it's next week, but I wanted to give you this in person. I'd almost forgotten my own birthday was coming up. I opened the bag and found a small jewelry box inside. The necklace was simple, a silver letter A on a delicate chain. I immediately put it on, right next to Mrs. Chen's jade pendant. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched. It's perfect. My dad smiled, looking relieved. I wasn't sure. I mean, I'm still learning what you like. I'm still figuring that out myself. I admitted. We talked for almost 2 hours. He told me about his therapy sessions and how he was working through his guilt about what happened. I told him about school and my new friends and my painting. It felt surprisingly normal, like we were just a dad and daughter catching up. Before we left, he mentioned that my mom had started seeing a grief counselor. She's not ready to talk about you yet, he said carefully, but she's trying to work through her feelings about everything. I nodded, not wanting to get my hopes up. That's good for her. She keeps that photo album on her nightstand, he added. The one with your baby pictures. I've seen her looking at it sometimes. I didn't know what to say to that. I just hugged him goodbye. A quick, awkward embrace that still felt like progress. The next few months fell into a comfortable routine. School, therapy, hanging out with Charlotte and my new friends. My dad and I met for coffee every other week. I was starting to feel like a normal teenager, whatever that means. Then one day in April, about a year after I'd left home, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably my mother's. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a birthday card, one of those generic happy birthday ones with flowers on the front. My birthday had been months ago, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the name on the envelope, Amelia. The message inside was brief. I'm trying to understand. It's hard. Mom. No declaration of love or acceptance. No apology. Just 7 words. But they were the first words she directly addressed to Amelia, not Andrew. It wasn't much, but it was something. I showed the card to my therapist at our next session. Dr. Patel had been helping me work through my complicated feelings about my parents for months. She reminded me that healing isn't linear, and that my mom's small step was still progress. What do you want to do about it? She asked. I thought about it for a while. I think I want to write back, I said finally. Just something short, to let her know I got her card. So I did. I bought a simple thank you card and wrote, "Thank you for trying. It means a lot. Amelia." I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. But a month later, my dad mentioned that my mom had put my card on the refrigerator. Another small step. Summer came, and with it, my 1-year anniversary of independence. The Rainbow Bridge program had a tradition of celebrating these milestones. My housemates decorated our apartment with streamers and balloons. Jen brought cupcakes. Charlotte and her parents came too. Even my dad showed up with a gift. A set of professional quality paints that must have cost a fortune. As I looked around at all these people who accepted me for who I was, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A year ago, I'd been trapped in a life that wasn't mine. Now I was surrounded by people who saw the real me. The only shadow on the day was my mom's absence. I tried not to think about it too much, but I couldn't help wondering if she would ever be part of my life again. Then, as we were cutting the cake, there was a knock at the door. Harper went to answer it, then came back looking confused. "Amelia? There's someone here for you." I walked to the door, and there she was, my mom, standing awkwardly in the hallway holding a small gift bag. She looked thinner than I remembered, and there were new lines around her eyes. "Hi," she said quietly. "Your dad told me about the party. I hope it's okay that I came." I was too shocked to speak. I just nodded and stepped aside to let her in. The room fell silent as she entered. My dad looked as surprised as I felt. My mom handed me the gift bag. "It's not much," she said. "Just something I thought you might like." Inside was a silver frame containing a photo I'd never seen before. It was me as a baby, maybe 6 months old, wearing a frilly pink dress. I was sitting on my mom's lap, and we were both laughing at something off camera. On the back of the frame, she'd written, "Amelia, 6 months old." I looked up at her, tears filling my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded, her own eyes wet. "I'm sorry it took me so long," she said. Her voice broke on the last word. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to hug her, but another part was still hurt and angry about everything that had happened. In the end, I just asked if she wanted some cake. She stayed for about an hour. It was awkward and tense, but she made an effort. She used my correct name. She asked about school and my painting. She complimented my hair. Small things, but meaningful. Before she left, she pulled me aside. "I'm not going to pretend this is easy for me," she said. "I'm still processing everything, but I miss you, and I want to try. That's all I'm asking," I told her. "Just try." She nodded. "Maybe we could have lunch sometime, just to talk?" "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. After she left, my dad hugged me. "She's been working up to this for months," he said. "I'm proud of both of you." The lunch with my mom happened the following week. We met at a neutral place, a cafe neither of us had been to before. The conversation was stilted at first. We stuck to safe topics, the weather, my classes, her garden, but gradually, we started talking about more important things. "I've been seeing someone," she said, "a therapist who specializes in grief and loss. She's helping me understand that I've been projecting my grief about the baby onto you. It wasn't fair." "No, it wasn't," I agreed, "but I understand why you did it." She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "I can't promise I'll always get it right, but I want to know my daughter." It wasn't a perfect Hollywood ending. My mom still slipped up sometimes and called me Andrew. She still got uncomfortable when I wore anything too feminine. We still had awkward silences and painful conversations, but we were trying, and that was more than I'd hoped for a year ago. By the time I started my senior year of high school, things had settled into a new normal. I still lived at Rainbow Bridge Housing, but I had dinner with my parents once a week. My dad and I were rebuilding our relationship. My mom and I were creating one from scratch. I don't know what the future holds. College is on the horizon, and I'm thinking about studying art therapy. I want to help other kids who've been through identity struggles like mine. I still have that photo album my dad gave me, and now it sits next to the framed baby picture from my mom. Together, they tell the story of Amelia, who was lost for a while but finally found her way home.